Welcome to Information Services Department lecture. The objectives today are going to be talking about the location of an Information Services Department, the difference between operations and applications, roles and responsibilities of different team members within that department, and some of the educational requirements and certifications. So oftentimes the location of the service department could be remote, it could be in a different building. Remote being it could be remote in a different building on that facility or owned by that facility. Sometimes it can be centralized in a larger building. Some of our larger health systems, large organizations in big cities might even have a separate building in a downtown area where the IT is centralized and it's a distance to actually get to the hospital or the organization, depending on what building of the organization needs help if there's an IT issue. Sometimes it's remote, meaning it's outsourced and the folks work from their homes or from an office in a different city, sometimes even a different country. Smaller organizations, historically, it's been in the basement. I spent many years in a basement, and I also worked offsite in a separate building away from the department. So they really can be anywhere. And some of those challenges, though, are going to be FaceTime. One of the interesting stories I always had was we had a service desk call for my application that I was supporting. The person reached out to me and the screen was all glitchy, something was flashing, they couldn't get it to do anything. And I asked them to do a couple maneuvers. I could remote desktop in and see what was happening, ask them to double check their keyboard, make sure nothing was stuck. It was this very unusual thing. And finally, I had to call, and I did have a coworker because it was after 5, but I had a coworker that happened to be in the hospital that was able to go up and check the situation out. And sure enough, the keyboard was stuck. There was a little piece of dust or paperclip or something. The tray, maybe it was in the box it was in. Um, Not sure exactly, but the point was that's something that being remote and doing a remote desktop in to see what was going on with the application was something that you just couldn't do. I had to be there in person, or somebody had to be there in person, face to face, to see it. Another issue with that face to face time is it's truly different when you can stand there with the person, physically be present while they're going through the motions on their keyboard. It's one thing to have them click around while you're remote desktoped in and be able to see what's happening, but you really can't get a full sense of, are they hitting a control key at the same time? Is there something physically by the way things are positioned that might be affecting the way they're clicking or the keyboard strokes? Loose wires, different things. It's just different when you're in person. Sometimes it's not just the technology is what I'm getting at. Sometimes it's the person that's potentially part of that issue. Um, some other things that happen is if you can't with face to face is sometimes it's a very critical situation. Maybe it's a code they're trying to save somebody's life, and there really just isn't a good time for somebody to support you remote desktoping into the computer. Like you have to be present and almost part of that situation and just help drive until you get through that issue. And they also don't get to know you if you're not physically on site. You are a stranger to them. So sometimes it can be uncomfortable then when you're in certain patient care areas, certain situations. It's just can feel awkward until they get to know you. And with applications analysts, as we will talk, some of that also has to do with doing some regular rounding to help folks get to know you. So those are some of the challenges when you work remotely. So your connectivity, your inability to see people face to face, to get to know them, to see what might physically be going on in the situation versus what's happening within the computer systems application. And also less of hearing what's going on around. When you're present, sometimes other folks will chime in when they know that you're working on a particular issue. Some of the benefits, of course, are being able to work in your PJs if you're working from home or a remote area, less interruptions. When I was off site, it was obviously not as convenient for some of the clinical staff to find me. So when I was in the basement, they were on their lunch break, they were taking a coffee break, they would just run downstairs and knock on my door, come in and start talking to me. But that's a constant interruption. Sometimes it's good because I get a lot of information, and other times it's bad because I can't get anything done. When I was remote, I could get a lot done. I could close my office door and nobody bothered me. I could get a phone call, let it go to voicemail. I could get a ticket that I could work on my time. So there is some increased productivity and ability to focus. So the different components of most IT service departments consist of their operations and their applications. Operations are your network your engineers, system engineers, telephony, usually your help desk is part of the operations, and applications is your analysts that are supporting all of the different applications within the organization. These could be clinical analysts supporting things like your electronic medical record, your the nursing workflow, the physician documentation, could even be the training and the educators for those. And then the business analysts are usually involved with your supply chain type programs and applications. Other business applications would be anything that works for your HR department. So time clock or personnel type applications. Some of you may be familiar with things like Lawson or PeopleSoft or Kronos. They usually also work with the financial applications. So your patient financial services, patient accounting, your registration systems. So even if it is an integrated component of your larger EMR, as we've talked through some of these things like registration and patient accounting are usually a package of your electronic medical record or electronic health record, the business analysts will support those pieces of that integrated record application, and the clinical analysts will support the clinicians, the providers, nursing, and doctors. So on the operations side, you've got the service desk, which is generally your first line of support. And as we go through this, your ITIL model, ITIL, you really have to have some kind of triage and structure in place so that they don't get overwhelmed with tickets, so they understand which ones need to be addressed immediately and which ones can be logged. Usually they're the first line that also will triage those tickets out to the analysts. So they will get the call. They're responsible for any electronically submitted tickets. They're the front line for customer support, whether it's a physician, transcription, a director, the CEO of the company. Usually there's the help desk number. They're the first person on the phone that somebody meets that is the face or voice of the operations department, of the information services department as a whole. Some other things that I have experienced in the past is they do the desktop deployment. So oftentimes they're the ones that when they're not physically on the service desk, or they're not doing the phone answering part, they're the ones that are delivering the hardware and plugging it in and setting it up. They could even be, when they're on the service desk, when they're waiting for calls to come in, be the ones that are re-imaging devices, potentially breaking devices down and destroying hard drives. So any of those kinds of jobs can be done by a service desk person. The system engineers are usually doing desktop applications, application delivery and deployment, your telephony and your communications, which can be your hardware and your software. And then the network engineers do the connectivity, server maintenance, backing up programs, making sure packages are installed, working on the data center design and maintenance within the data center. So any of those other servers that need to be done, potentially normalizing databases and reworking the SANs and the reload. Citrix environments are usually what those system engineers and network engineers, the two, they're working on. Some places they're interchangeable, some places they have the different folks. Um, oops. So we talked a little bit about your customer service skills, the face of IT, understanding triage. Really, just this is reiterating it. And experience is one of the keys. So at this level, they have some sort of associate degree or higher, and generally recommended that they have some sort of certification for the area you're working in. So specifically, if you have the, as you all are in this class, and one of those HIT, health information technology certifications, and or you have, maybe you've been a CNA before or patient care tech, where you have a little bit of understanding of an organization when it comes to a health IT service desk operation, that type of experience can be key, and many of them pursue additional professional certifications to help with that. System engineers usually also have a degree in business communications, information technologies related. So these could be your folks with a CIS degree, keeping current again on operating systems, viruses, deploying and maintaining the applications, all levels of education and experience for these as well. Your network engineers, similarly, most of them have advanced degrees in my experience and are constantly going to um, additional conferences and things to keep up on the latest and greatest. Oftentimes you'll see these job descriptions, at least historically, have been written as a bachelor preferred or equivalent experience. And the reason is, as many folks got into the computer world, hardware and software engineering and networking, sort of by default, in a way that they're almost self-taught. So you have all of this experience in these areas, and you certainly don't want to lose somebody's experience simply because they don't have the time spent in a classroom. So here's some certifications that we often see with the service desk. You get your CompTIA A+. You may all be familiar with these. If you have questions, please reach out to me. Generally, we have some links on how you can get those. There's some in the beginning of your book, I believe. Microsoft certified, Cisco tests, different levels of exposure and certification that when you can put those on a resume can help you, particularly in the with HIT as well. And these, again, some for the operations. You guys can read through those. Network engineers. So Google any of these. Um, so applications, as we talked, usually refers to the software. And applications analysts can do anything usually from interface with the end user, so understanding how they're using it, helping train them, but also there's generally some configurability that is available within those applications, whether it's rearranging the display on the screen, introducing some additional logic, maybe writing some rules within that application. Again, there's levels of application support. When I was an applications analyst, I did everything from help with hardware installation to doing HTML and JavaScripting to help configure the actual application itself. So be prepared, it can run the gamut. As we've talked earlier, workflow is one of those really big things with clinical analysts that I stress to folks is it doesn't do you any good if you have all the programming skills and all the access to modify the application or configure it if you don't understand how the end user is using it. And if there's an issue where they're using it correctly but data is not being collected appropriately, or data is missing, or you can't get the data reported out, then you really need to sit with them and watch how they're using it and understand if it's education that's needed, or if you need to move that checkbox somewhere on the screen so that it will work better in their workflow. But really watching them is the only way to do that. Again, as we talked, business analyst, registration, fiscal, materials management, which can be your supply chain, Application specific to any business needs. Oftentimes, the database management will fall under business analyst depending on the database. Clinical analyst, so your clinical information systems include, again, your nursing systems where you're documenting your patient care, where your doctors are doing their dictation, could be your health information management system, and your medical record system, and then of course the specialty areas, your lab system, your radiology system, cardiovascular and hemodynamic systems. You could have very specialized surgical systems, behavioral health systems. So all of those would count as your clinical systems. And we usually refer to that as the heart of the EMR, only because that is the big part. Without taking care of the patients, there would not be an electronic medical record. Oftentimes, working in conjunction with the operations are the clinical analysts and the informaticians that are also working on, if they're specialty devices, do they need dual monitors, single monitors, should be mounted to the wall? It could be a location. We had operations decided that the analysts were not needed for some of the hardware as we were going through our implementation of our electronic medical record. And after go live, it was realized that they had tethered a barcode scanner near the head of the patient's bed to do bed barcode med administration, which is all fine and good. But on the medical surgical floor, these patients are much more mobile, and there was a recliner they're able to sit in to see their TV that's on the opposite side of the room, a few feet from the end of the bed on the opposite side of the room, foot of the bed, and the tethered barcode scanner would not reach. So if a patient was sitting in their chair watching their shows and it was time for medications, the patient was being asked to get out of their comfortable situation or get help to get back to bed. It just made it very awkward. I'm not saying having the application analyst would have been the answer, that we would have noticed that right away and wouldn't have made the same mistake, but there's a good chance back to workflow, when you understand the clinical workflow and how the system is going to be used, some of those can be avoided. Um, and they also need to work closely together. You have wireless access points, where the switch closets are, things like that. How much um, infrastructure is needed and where that infrastructure needs to be support in order to support some of those clinical workflows. So they really do need to work together. Education for applications analysts can run the gamut. If you've got an aptitude for computers and you've got a background in surgery, there's a good chance that you'll be the person that's going to be the surgery analyst. If you were uh, a pharmacy tech and you have an aptitude for computers, oftentimes the pharmacy tech can be the pharmacy analyst. So education aside, when it comes to the organization, it's really again about experience and understanding those clinical spaces, understanding the business world and how that information is going to be used, and an aptitude to do some of those computer configurations. Obviously, if you have a background in computers as well, with some sort of education and can speak to the engineering of the software or speak to how you can do some of those configurations, codes, understanding database normalization, have report writing skills with SQL or some of the other applications out there, there's a good chance that this is an area that you could support. When it comes to some of the larger companies and the vendors, oftentimes they are looking for a bachelor degree or above. They're looking very specific for an IS degree, experience many times written as 5 years or more of clinical experience, or 2 years of clinical experience and at least 5 years working in health information technology. So just know that there's a wide range of um, education and experience that they might be looking for. You can get DBA certifications. I have my ANCC board certified in informatics, which is the American Nursing Credentialing College. Um, there's project management professional, or your PMP. Operations and applications together are generally on call 24/7, 365. Depending on the size of your department, there's usually a rotating call. There's strategy around cross-training folks to manage. On call, generally you have a person on call that approaches it with that ITIL experience, ITIL, and can triage whatever that call is, and then either can fix it themselves, can address it at that time, walk the person through what they need to click on, or then there is the second level where they know who the clinical analyst per se is on. So for instance, I would take call, and many of the calls usually are clinical. So let's just put it that way. So it's late at night, it's 2 a.m., and something's happening in the emergency department. They aren't able to do their barcode med administration, so they call me. I walk them through it. Maybe I can tell them just to reboot the scanner, the handheld scanner, walk them through recalibrating with it, because that information we've got right usually in the departments, clinical departments, and everything works. But maybe they call and they say that none of the time clocks are working and nobody can badge in and out, something of that nature. So I will take that information. That's not an area of my expertise, but the business analyst, as a second line, I know that person, how I can reach them, and if it's something that can wait until morning. So let's say it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I talk to folks. I'm like, well, write down your times. We can backlog that, and I'll get this in the system. We'll get on it first thing in the morning at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. So it's really understanding that triage process. Some other components of that as well are then, how do you get some of that cross training? And there are strategies around that. I personally was involved where the analyst, whether it was a business analyst, a clinical analyst, whomever, sat on the help desk. So let's say we had our little office space or our little cubicle in the applications department. We would actually, take our laptops, whatever, dock them, and sit with the service desk in their area for a week. And so any of those calls, we actually work the service desk, we help them. And part of that is not, they get, the reason for this that's so valuable in my opinion is you're sitting together in that area. There, at that time there were 3 or 4 of us. We got to hear, as the clinical analysts or the business analysts, we got to hear some of the calls they were answering, and saw and experienced some of the other tasks that they did, whether it was re-imaging devices or destroying hard drives, some of those things. So we had an idea. We get to make friends with them. So you're working as a team. It builds team building. And they also get to hear us from our area of expertise on that particular type of application when that call would come through. Then they get to hear how we're responding, and even would sit with us. So that type of call would come in. Maybe they would be the one answering the phone, and then they would say, hey, Carrie, I've got a nurse up on the floor that's having trouble with XYZ. So they'd pass the call to me, and then they'd come over and sit with me while I managed that call, so they could hear and see how I was resolving it. So it really is about that strategy on how you can cross train folks, and you can all work together. And again, team building, so you get to know each other. Sometimes there's odd hours as well. So in addition to being on call, the IT departments are always available. So they may have staggered shifts. You may have, besides your normal 8 to 5, you may have people coming in at noon or working a night shift, potentially separately from being on call to manage things. There is also the times that we have system updates, system upgrades, application upgrades. Any of those kinds of things that happen are generally scheduled during the off hours, and when census is low, or when we know that there isn't activity. Obviously, you're not going to do a surgery upgrade on a Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. when that's the highest volume day for actually doing surgeries. So from that perspective, you may be in on a night shift, or late in an afternoon, or on a weekend holiday, probably not a holiday, but say a day where We know that the census is low and things are less busy, so that those types of upgrades, uploads, improvements can be managed. So in summary, location has both challenges and benefits. Operations and analysts need to work as a team. The operations keep the lights on, the servers humming. They are usually the face of IS and support from a help desk, the first voice people see. Applications manage the specific application software, potentially help with selecting hardware for those very specific specialized areas: surgery, lab, radiology, nursing. We do workflow, the data collection. Generally, that's where your informatics are going to sit and do their data analysis. There are educational requirements. Every employer is different. It's supply and demand. So small town versus large city, large organization versus small organization. There are several certifications available for all of these areas. Some are very specialized, but all of them promote professional development and lead to career advancement and opportunity. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.